Okay. Could you please start with, we don't do a formal roll call, do we, or do we?
No, not necessarily, but I'm happy to identify folks, roundtable members if you like, and whatever
sure.
you want to
And
do.
then I mean, normally we start the meeting with you or Angela reading off the how we're going to conduct the meeting. Do you want to go ahead with that?
I think
and
Angela
then we will
can
dive
do
in.
that.
I'm sorry, I was having so much fun reading the study that I lost track of time. Truly having much fun reading it. So please go ahead and read the rules of engagement.
Yeah, thank you. Michelle, if you want to acknowledge the members present, and I will give public members instructions.
We'd like to start the San Francisco Community Roundtable's Ground-Based Noise Ad Hoc Subcommittee meeting of Wednesday, January the 21st, 2021, and recognizing members Ricardo Ortiz, Ann Schneider, Al Royce, Linda Woolen, I think representing the board member, and that's all I can see at this point. Recognizing other people, of course, Kathleen Wentworth is here, as well as representatives from HMMH, Tim Middleton, and Justin.
Very good. Then keeping us moving along, and here is the problem. I have the agenda electronically. Let's move into the next agenda item, which I believe is the study.
Sorry, Chair Snyder, if I can just give the instructions for public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Clearly I'm on hyper mode. Please go ahead. My apologies.
No worries. Thank you so much. For those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment period, and for each item on the regular agenda, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, you may press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, we will prompt you to unmute your microphone and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. Please note that members of the public must wait for the prompt in connection with each agenda item before using the raise hand function. For example, you cannot raise your hand in the beginning of the meeting if you wish to speak on an item later in the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. And I'm just getting to the agenda here.
I'm sorry for not recognizing Bert Ganong from the airport as well. I apologize, Bert.
Very good. And I see 8 members of the public. We did hear from a couple of public members. Well, it was at the same time as the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Roundtable. All right. If we've had call to order, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on items not on the agenda?
Thank you, Chair Schneider. As a reminder, if you're calling by phone, you may press *9 or raise hand feature to indicate your desire to speak. But Chair Schneider, we do not have any hands raised for items not on the agenda.
Very good. And in terms of materials sent to us ahead of time, I think it's all related to our main topic. Is that what you have, Angela? Or Michelle? It's all related to the noise study?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, moving along. I believe we have our consultant, Justin, who's going to give us an overview. Michelle, that's how you want to run it? Very good. We give Justin, you have control.
Thank you. Okay, let me see here. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys see that? Hopefully.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. First, I would like to introduce Tim Middleton, who's a senior consultant with HMH, who joined the call today. So thanks, Tim. Tim led the project management of this study and worked closely with the noise modelers here at HMH. So I am happy to have him online. Just just in case there's any additional questions that I cannot answer, but we'll walk through these things. And Tim, if I miss anything you think that warrants, please chime in and add to that.
Sounds good. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yep. And so we'll talk about we'll go over quickly the project description, some of the inputs that we used, and then really dive into summary of results and next steps. So a little bit of a project description here. HMH, defined a project study area, focusing in on areas southwest of runways 1 left and 1 right. And those are predominantly San Bruno, Millbrae, Burlingame, Hillsborough communities. And we received a lot of feedback from them. Thank you for having the meetings with us prior to and during the modeling effort. We received information on some recommended receivers. Also, Millbrae was able to get us some information regarding heights of buildings and new development that's occurring. And all that was incorporated into the model, and we'll dive into that more on project inputs. So the goals was to better understand how ground noise propagates through the communities adjacent to SFO. And the report really goes into a lot of detail regarding, just how that's happening. And we have tables and figures to kind of help you through. I think the figures do a good job at showing how it propagates specifically. But if you want to get down into the weeds, the tables provide it on a frequency basis, which we then go ahead and summarize in our report. And then in addition to that, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also for those who have looked at the report yet or haven't yet, there are appendices in there, and we do have zoomed in graphics as well, which depending on where you're looking could be helpful too. So those are at the end in Appendix H, just because the nature of putting all that in a report, those ended up in an appendice. So go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I mean, that's an important portion, especially as we get to the second goal, which is vegetation. And, having that as a means to reduce noise and what that really looks like. And we modeled that. And as Tim mentioned, we provided some enlarged figures in the appendix that could hope, you would be able to see some of those, reduced noise levels and where those occur. So hopefully that is helpful. And I could actually bring up that appendix. I actually have it ready just in case you want to take a closer look after I give this summary. So inputs, a lot of I'd say a good portion of our work was just collecting the data. You could see all the different sources that we utilized to basically create a 3D model of the environment. SFO provided some really good detailed information of everything in their, area, and including the new hotel. Sorry, and we got information from Caltrans, and County of San Mateo also had some information available. So all this went into digitizing in the model before we could even actually input the source information and whatnot. We actually ended up with 28 receptor locations. We had envisioned 12 in the scope, but through the communication with the various cities and towns, we added additional receivers of interest to make sure we captured everything. We also included receptors that were located right behind vegetation, so we could see how the noise is reduced through the vegetation and how it falls off. And falls off, I mean by becoming less effective. We modeled 3 aircraft types as per information received from Bert. So thank you, Bert, for providing information on the predominant aircraft types with the series associated that we could then utilize in the model. And he also provided us with takeoff and secondary takeoff points along the runway. So thank you, Bert, for that information. And then the vegetation, we actually came up with a thickness and length and height in an area of the Caltrans right-of-way. And we selected that location because of its close proximity to the runways. And we wanted to see, without any other factors, other buildings necessarily, how vegetation would actually be effective and how it would be reduced. And that's why we placed receiver points behind the vegetation. And our selection of 50 feet was something that was reasonable based off of literature. It also happens to kind of coincide with pretty much the depth of the Caltrans right-of-way. And the height was determined through some of the various studies that we've done of what would be considered reasonable for a dense vegetation. And also just looking at some of the existing trees and foliage along the freeway. So I won't go through each of these. I'm pretty sure everyone here is familiar with each of the 6 scenarios that we were tasked with doing. We hopefully broke them out in an easy to understand manner in the report. But we looked at these various scenarios with aircraft types and then different runways and different takeoff points. Tim, do you want to say anything regarding some of the scenarios or anything of interest here?
Yeah, I would just say with the takeoff points, we refer to it as a secondary takeoff point, but that's really where on average, the aircraft depart and leave the runway and become airborne, sometimes called a point of rotation, or generally called a point of rotation. So that's not actually where an aircraft is starting its takeoff roll. So we're just modeling the noise from that location where they'd be at full power on takeoff roll. So I just want to be clear of that, because when you look at the figure, there's a little plane showing you where the noise is generating from. That's not where it started its takeoff roll. That's just where the noise is modeled for that one. So
good point. Thank you. Here's an example in large figure. This is a A320 aircraft type without vegetation taking off at the start of takeoff, the end of the runway of 1 left. In this figure, and sorry, I don't have the bands here of values, but I'll bring that up in a separate appendix. You could see some of the vegetation points, which are receivers here. We call them V, so for vegetation, that was the purpose of those points. And then you could see slightly some of the other receivers in the community, one being RMT8, which is a permanent noise monitor from San Francisco that we use to just coincide with that location. And then there's an additional receiver that's either from feedback received or something that HMH thought would be a good location to have. And I will now kind of rotate back and forth with the next slide. You could see it with vegetation, and I'll kind of do that a couple times so you could see basically how the vegetation line, which is in green, pulls the noise back. And you could see that it's really the thing that I would highlight is most effective closer in to behind the vegetation. All right, so summary of results. The effectiveness of the vegetation really was shown at the deltas between those vegetation points. The other receivers that either were permanent noise monitors or receivers that were of interest didn't necessarily show any LMAX and spectral changes in noise. And that's probably through distance and, the effectiveness of vegetation being relatively close in, which leads us to, a recommendation that it be, if mitigation is, I would say, recommended in terms of vegetation or a wall, you want to locate it as close to a receptor as possible to get the most effects of it. And that could easily be seen in those enlarged figures in the appendix, where you could kind of, I recommend doing it through the PDF. I know it's hard when you print it out and you can't kind of, flip like that really quickly. But in a PDF, you could actually hit next and previous, and you could see the effects in different locations. So that's how I recommend viewing that. And it's worth knowing that, the change in noise levels actually at those vegetation points were not necessarily above 3 dB, which would be, a change of 3 dB is barely perceivable in general, right? And so they're not necessarily the case there. I think some range from 1 to 1.2 dB. Tim, I think that's correct, right? Somewhere in that range. And
yeah, about 1 to 1.5.
Yeah, and it depends on frequency as well, right? We saw that higher frequencies were more reduced, and low frequencies, as expected, were harder to have those reductions. If vegetation is to be utilized, somewhere between a thickness of 33 and 66 feet would be recommended. And that's just based off of the results that we've seen. And knowing that we ran a 50-foot case and some of the previous literature review of what vegetation would provide, if you were looking to achieve somewhere in that 1 dB range of reduction, you would need a thickness between 33 and 66 feet. Next steps. So, where can we go from here? I think this study provides a good understanding of how ground noise propagates. It discusses vegetation to the extent that it's feasible to put in a certain location, and sort of sets expectations on what it can and cannot do in terms of noise reduction. And HMH recommends that one of the biggest things would be to work with planning departments in especially the design of new construction or redevelopment to sort of incorporate a ground-based noise overview to them. And what that means is basically to have that in consideration in design as a basis for, either designing a site plan, locating buildings in certain positions or orientations, how to effectively use walls and vegetation in your design to better assist potentially on reducing noise. And that goes for construction materials too. A lot of builders use construction materials to comply with energy standards or the California Building Code, for example. Well, how can they incorporate materials that could be used for ground-based noise? What materials could be used to reduce that low frequency noise that's so hard to mitigate? So there's things there that I think could be provided based off of this study that could help inform some of those decisions moving forward. And lastly, in terms of modeling efforts, a lot of effort went into just creating this model. in terms of, creating a 3D environment and collecting all that data and information. And I think that's something that could be very useful moving forward, in that it's much more easy and cost effective to now create, run different alternatives. If SFO has different buildings or there's different things going on, for example, seawalls, I know that has been discussed that Bert probably could elaborate on. But if things of that nature pop up, or other cities or towns have, construction that you may want to know more about how it's propagating, it's much more, we can much more efficiently run those scenarios in the model and get you that input and help inform some of those decisions. So Tim, do you have anything else before we kind of?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add is with the vegetation, as you said, showing the V1, V2, V3s very close in. We did that as a choice so that you can see the drop off of effectiveness the farther you are away from this barrier. And obviously, depending on what model the barrier is, as Justin said, if you use different thickness of vegetation or if you use berms, it could be a different varying level of it. And each V1, V2, V3 are approximately 25 feet apart. So as you go farther away from the airport toward residential, you can kind of see that. I don't know if you can zoom in on that one, but so that's what we were going for with that, so that you can kind of you can see it through in the tables too, where you compare the V1, V2, and V3 in the report. But that's most of it. And as you said, with all the work that went into digitizing, we could at certain points put in other, if we know there's new buildings going in, or if you said, as you said, there's different construction going in, modifying it or maybe even modeling a different type of aircraft or something like that is a little bit easier now that we've already built this three-dimensional model with all of the data that was downloaded and data that was, shared with us to create this study. So.
Yeah.
Okay, before
lastly, can I just say one more
Please
thing?
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to actually just thank everybody. I mean, this was a collaborative effort, and so I want to thank all the meetings we've had previously and side meetings for this study. Thank you for all the material and information that eventually went into this model, because that ultimately, we wanted it to be as accurate and representative as possible. So.
Okay. So to Justin and to Mr. Middleton, thank you. As I said, I did finish reading it, and as someone who was at one time trained in science, sometimes to me the best results of a study is showing you the need for more studies or additional things we can look at, and how to look at some of the data. So before I open it up to the members, I have a question. First of all, do the members feel like that you had enough time to read this and digest this, because it's complicated? And if you feel like we need more time, that will come back when Michelle has mentioned to me and probably to Chair Ortiz, and welcome Vice Chair Sam Hindy from Foster City to talk about the next steps for the ground-based noise table in general. Michelle pointed out that technically the ground-based noise ad hoc committee was supposed to exist for a short time, do a little bit of work, and then merge back into the full roundtable. I am of the mind that we need to continue as a ground-based noise and still dive into more of the real detail of it that would be complicated to do at the full roundtable. So from the members, so Linda, Vice Mayor Ortiz, Linda for Supervisor Pine, Vice Chair Sam Hindy, and Al, and Mayor Royce. What do you think in terms of next steps for ground-based noise before we dive into the report? Because that tells me how quickly we have to get through the report today.
I can speak, Ann, if you don't mind.
Please.
One is I've not had a chance to fully digest it. 175 pages. I was going to try to print it here and gave up. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
I ran out of color ink, so I would like to look at it a little bit more. And I need to read it hard copy. I have trouble reading it on screen, so I'd like more time. Number one. Number
Okay.
two,
Yeah.
though, I do appreciate the report, because reports give you information whether they're good news or bad news, and they can lead you to further questions, as the chairman just mentioned. So there may be some other questions that come out of this that'd be helpful. But if I understand it correctly, and Justin and Tim, you could help me,
Mhm.
the reduction in noise level to the air, which is discernible, is relatively low due to vegetation. So the benefit of vegetation may not be as great as what we had hoped. And what I don't fully understand is the vegetation where it's located, either located close to the departure points or close to the receptors, how much of a difference that makes. But did I hear correctly that the net result of vegetation yields a very limited result based on what we were hoping for, the 3 decimal points?
Definitely, that's the case. It's roughly, it varies by frequency, and the high frequencies are more reduced. But overall, you're looking at a maximum of 1 to 1.2 dB.
Yeah.
And that not being necessarily discernible by a human ear. And why that location was selected was just representative of seeing how that reduction, what kind of reduction could we expect if you were to install vegetation, in various locations that you found to be, suitable for it and able, to be done. So yes, yeah, I think you do have that correct.
Yeah, and
Mayor-
I do.
Go
just
ahead,
to add
Mayor.
to,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Al.
No, Tim can talk, but I was going to follow up on that with respect to, intuitively, I would have thought it would have yielded greater results. And so I'm just sort of surprised that the results are so low. So why would that be? Because did we not get information before that vegetation does reduce the noise? So I don't want to question the results of the study, but it intuitively surprised me.
Yeah, well, it depends on various variables like thickness, right? And we selected a thickness of 50 feet just based off of that range of what would be expected, and also just what we thought would potentially be reasonable for a city or a town to implement, right? I don't think, necessarily people have 200 feet plus of space to just plant vegetation, right? So obviously with a greater thickness, such as 200 feet or something, you could obtain larger quantities of reduction. So this was something that we felt that was most reasonable and representative of something that you could implement.
Okay.
Mayor? If I could just add, because I think you're in the right track, but if I could hear from our other ground-based noise members about, do we want ground-based noise to continue? We've heard from Mayor Royce and Mayor Schneider. We would like to see ground-based noise committee continue. Where is Vice Mayor Ortiz and Councilman Hindi?
Thank you. I'll give you my opinion. I think we have much more work to do on ground-based noise, and I think that the subcommittee should continue. And I think we've done important work up to now, but we have a little more to go. And I am also with Mayor Royce, and I do need a little more time to digest. I have not been through the whole thing, and I do need a little more time to look at it. So,
excellent. Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm agreeing with all that has been said, and I think in a way, this report raises more questions than it answers. And I really particularly appreciate the last point in the conclusions, or the summary conclusions, which is that this is an amazing amount of data to be all incorporated into one model and to have, I feel like there's so much we can do with this. I don't know what yet, but I want to talk about that some more. So thank you.
Excellent. So based on that input and Vice Chair Hindi, again, I know you're a little outside the realm that's getting a lot of the low frequency noise, but any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just very quickly, as you know, I have not been part of the conversation, so I'm going to defer to you and to your colleagues as to the recommendation. And I have not had a chance to go through the report, quite frankly.
Very good. So what I'm taking is that whereas I've gotten through it, I've done my first dive, which means when I read through it, I put, oh, what about this? What about that? What about this? So I too would like more time to read it, but I'm wondering how to most productively use our next 57 minutes. Is it best for us to do kind of a high level, what we want, or to dive into some details so that staff or the consultant can get answers to those questions? What do you think is the best approach? Michelle, what do you think is the best approach with 1 hour of our time to dive into a very complicated report?
Well, what I thought the benefit of the report was not necessarily on the landscaping end, but was on the actual measurement of the 90 dB in frequency range. I think that that's where the value of this model is that typical projects that are going to be built and you require that they conduct a noise study is doing a different level of noise measurement. It's not measuring ground-based noise. So here you have, for the first time ever, a built model that's going to be able to measure that. So I think that's the first thing, is there's some opportunities in future to do that measurement. But I think the other aspect of it is trying to think about what kind of conversations need to happen either with the airport on where is those 90 dBs occurring, and is there any adjustments that could be made or are anticipated in their long range plan for making whatever adjustments need to be made on the airport side to address this. And also I think some separate meetings just with partners, I think, might be an opportunity where we're taking aspects of this and looking at the contour lines of where the 90 dBs are happening. And maybe those partners are either a combination of airport, Caltrans, city staff, to kind of talk about what are we really seeing here and what are the opportunities for addressing this? Is it all airport, or is it a combination of these 5 things? What are those 5 things? And once you know what the 5 things are, you might be able to create some kind of a document that says, this is our findings, this is what we recommend, and it's these 5 things. And then we can take it to the 4 or more cities that kind of folded into this project. So that's where I see the value of this work. So I'm not sure we can do anything at this meeting at this time. I think people need to digest it. I think we need to spend more time with figuring out with the internal team, who are some of the partners we need to meet with, and what are some of the next steps to do.
Thank you, Michelle. And to the rest of the committee, I just wanted to point out that Michelle and Justin and I met around 11 o'clock this morning and spent, golly, about 45 minutes looking at what could be concluded from the study, but also what is missing. And Michelle just alluded to that. From Millbrae's perspective, and with the COVID reduction in flights, it is very clear that a lot of the noise goes straight up into the hills from 101. So whereas the mitigation of that one test of vegetation, so going back to what Al said, this is only one area of vegetation. We didn't look at other bands of vegetation that may help Hillsborough, Burlingame, and the Millbrae Hills. We just looked at one area, but that one area, for example, from the neighborhood right at the end of runway 1 left, that's our Bayside Manor neighborhood, it is heavily impacted by 101 traffic. So bringing in Caltrans could be really useful. How much of that noise from that neighborhood is continuing to creep up the hillside into Millbrae, Burlingame, and Hillsborough? A little bit of that, Justin, we got a little bit of that information, how the move is propagating or attenuating as it concentrates up the hills. But that's where we have to really dive into the data to understand it. So I really appreciated this morning when Michelle suggested bringing in some of our other transportation partners. Coincidentally, I am working with our city manager, and 2 of our staff members are in the attendees list, our director for community development, Darcy Smith, and one of our chief planners, Sam Fielding, because I have come to realize that Millbrae is impacted not just by SFO, but by 3 or 4 or 5 other transportation agencies. And each one looks at their noise incrementally in totality. So it behooves Millbrae to move in that direction. So I appreciate that. Whether the rest of the roundtable wants to be in those meetings when it's not directly going to affect them, except as noise moves up the canyons, you know, I'm open to maybe more one-on-one city meetings or one-on-one planning commission meetings or planning department meetings on that. So, and again, go ahead, Michelle. Did I kind of talk? Did I kind of
That's
touch on
perfect.
everything we
And
talked about?
Yes, it's perfect. And I think that it might be good to hear from folks like Darcy and Sam, but also maybe Bert and Kathleen about, you know, do they need more time to look at this as well? But are they seeing anything in particular that we need to think about? And then maybe we just need to adjourn and just figure out what are some of the next things.
So what if we gave everyone, I have well more than 3 things I've pulled out of the report, but if everyone gave a couple of questions like Al did, and we take that list, we go through the members, and then we open it up to the public, and at that point, circle back and see if we've given enough for us to do a Q&A or an FAQ on the study itself. Does that sound reasonable? Ricardo, Al, Linda? I hate to tell you, I could probably fill up the next 45 minutes just on my questions, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, for me, it would be much better if I had the time to review some of it and maybe even have some conversations with Justin and clarifications before we really delve into it. So I would appreciate a little more time.
Okay. Let me throw a couple of ideas out there just to help you, or things that I think might help, Justin. I appreciate you saying flipping back and forth between the different PDFs. I was running back and forth between different neighborhoods that I have expressly experienced. So I use Central Park in Millbrae, which was monitor R8 or receptor 8, receptor 4. And because I was trying to compare the differences between the 85 decibels that Bayside Manor, that's Beverly, was reaching, and Central Park, and then comparing it to the test or the data from runway 1 takeoffs to 28s. And what I found in comparing those really quickly was a drop off of 10 to 14 decibels to 16 decibels if 28 takeoffs were used over runway 1 takeoffs. And that's just with a quick thing. So I think from your study, if we saw a chart that maybe compared the 28s to the 1s, that might give us some information. What Justin, the benefit I have over everyone else is Justin and Michelle and I talked about how some of this data might be used. Would completely electrifying SFO help with that little increment of decibels? Yes. Could potentially switching some nighttime flights from a runway 1 to a runway 28 allow neighborhoods all over to sleep a little bit better? I'm not saying we have a solution. I'm just saying, could this data support those kinds of recommendations? Does the taxi, where the planes sit and on the taxiway, is that contributing to the duration of noise, which we haven't, I couldn't make out duration in here. We're kind of looking at per incident as opposed to duration. All of those things, when everybody reads through it, try to look at that. My other thought, going back to what Al brought up, is we only looked at vegetation in one place, and we've seen that the sound arcs. So it could very well be that this particular, the location of vegetation will help Millbrae because of 101, and maybe a little bit of ground-based noise from the airport, but a wall of trees somewhere else may significantly help other neighborhoods. And we don't have that data we could think about making some assumptions. And Al, I used, if Hillsborough had a noisy area because of the topography, maybe there is a place to put a barrier of trees that would capture that sound as it's coming down its arc. We don't know that yet. Or at
Well,
least I don't think
I'd
we
be
know that
curious to see, because we do have groves of trees in different parts of town. So I'd be curious to see how those trees affect the sound. And I'm looking at the map, it doesn't really look like there's a big impact. So I'd be curious to, go with existing vegetation and see how that impacts the noise.
Okay, well, I will shut up. Those are just some of the things that I looked at in the report. I had fun trying to compare runway 1 to 28, but it was difficult. I don't know if there's another way you could recalculate the charts, Justin, or if the study is a done, if we can modify any of the way the data is presented.
Okay.
And actually, and I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Al, please.
You're getting in a couple of my questions. And by the way, I would defer until we've had a chance to read it in detail, but just some quick thoughts as I heard the report and scanned it. What flexibility do we have in modifying assumptions in this study, Justin? Is this a report with data points that we can, and you've got a model built out that we can change some of the locations, some of the data and see what happens then? Or is this report pretty much locked into the assumptions used?
I believe it's locked in.
Meaning
I think it's locked in. It's not necessarily, yes.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily to say that it's closed or that something else can't be looked into. And that's what we were trying to allude at, as the model's been created. So to do something like add a point or move a point is less effort on our part moving forward.
Okay, because research is really trial and error. So we have the ability to do some trial and error.
Yeah.
Some answers.
Right.
And I just want to clarify the question about duration. So these are LMAX contours. And so an LMAX for an event is the highest peak decibel point during any noise event. So if it's a 1 second event or a 1 hour event. So these are for the aircraft at full power departure settings. So this is the LMAX for a full power departure. It is not, it's not, it's the loudest it will be at that point for the departure. So it's not a representation of a time period. It's a representation of a snapshot in time for the LMAX, which is the peak of a noise event. So in this case, it's the noise event for the departures. So just wanted to clarify what the LMAX contour means for it. Yep.
Thanks, Tim.
Again, we had talked for the ground-based noise of creating a ground-based noise glossary, kind of trimmed down that's specific to how we're studying things. So sometimes when you're only jumping into this every other month, it's hard to hang on to all the definitions. Al, I think your point is spot on. A lot of reading this is showing now we know what we know. What is it that we don't know? And I'm wondering if, as each of us, including our staff and hopefully the public, as we read through it, we identify the other questions. And I know all of governments are poor now because of COVID, but it may mean that we will have to go out and search for more money for additional studies before we can make any recommendations of anything that is, as Michelle was talking about it, local governments, CIPs, and or state or federal funding, where the state is looking for biological solutions to environmental problems based on a funding call I was on a couple of weeks ago. So I think part of the good thing when we read through this is we see this now, but here are my other questions. And the questions are very important.
By the way, I'd have one more question for Justin when we meet next time.
Sure.
So I'll give you a prelude.
Sure.
I'd like to know from your perspective, what surprised you in this report? And number two, what additional information you think we ought to get out of it? And we can get that the next meeting, but you're the expert on this, you and Tim. So I'd really like to get your feedback on those two questions.
Great questions,
You can do it next. You can do it
Yeah.
next. Give some thought to that.
Okay. All right.
So it was what was unexpected, and Al, what was the other one? What was unexpected? And
Well,
What additional information?
number one,
would come about?
what surprised them on this report? And number two, what would they think what is next that we should expect to get out of this report? What would be the next steps from a report perspective, a study perspective, based on what we found here?
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
No
Thank
problem.
you, Al. So just going around the members, any other questions or comments we want to pick up before I open it to the public or the attendees list?
I had a quick question, technical, well, two maybe. Is that okay, Mayor?
Yes, please.
Thanks. Justin, can you go back to the slide that showed the whole study area with the receptor points in it?
Yes. No problem. One like this?
Yeah. And then just
Okay.
keep in mind, all of us, I know we had prior to the study being launched, when we were working on the scope of work, we had a long conversation about the location of the receptor points and the differences between them. And you do discuss it in the report, but for benefit of everyone on the call, can you just review, first of all, what the different types are and why we picked why those were included in the study?
Yeah, sure. So the V vegetation is for vegetation, and those receptor points are close to the vegetation, so we could see how vegetation's performing close by, especially. RMT locations, which are like 22, 8, 9, 10, 11. Those are SFO's permanent noise monitoring locations, which are collecting data, as some of you are aware. Everything else are related, either is an HOMH recommendation based off of trying to get a variety of location that would be representative of, the area, or locations that were recommended by the city and town as a point of interest. Now, I will say that Hillsborough and San Bruno, I tried my best to get all of your locations. Some of the locations that were sort of recommended were basically too far out, where there wouldn't be, you'd be even further out from this color range. And I think the model loses some accuracy there as you continue to go further and further. So HOMH did our best to bring in those locations just a little bit to be sort of within this study area. And specifically, I'll say like R11 and R12 over here in San Bruno, they literally were like R11 was on the other side of this dotted line, right? So it's in the same vicinity or neighborhood of interest right here, and still capturing, I think, what we wanted to capture. We just had to bring it in a tad to be kind of within this area. And like I said, this area is complex in that these are all 3D dimensional buildings and terrain built in. So it's pretty extensive in this area, and you could see how the noise is propagating up the hill, which is quite interesting. And you could see even this pocket right here, how it's loud here, but it's quieter here. That's terrain effects right here.
It jumps.
Of how it's propagating. Yes, it jumped. Exactly.
So
yeah.
Oh, sorry, but not to belabor the point, but remind you. So you said that if you go too far out, the model becomes harder to.
Yeah, I think
why we decided not to go back in the hills of Burlingame and Hillsborough. I know there was a reason for that, but if you could remind.
Yeah, we kind of define a certain path, and even then it starts to
I think
lose. Yeah, go ahead.
For this one, this is the secondary departure point, right?
It's far, yeah, and it's 28, Tim. Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look, but I believe there is a range where sound plans stops calculating after a certain distance. And I think that actually is built into the modeling software itself, just because of the way computations work. The farther you go out in a circle, it gets too large. I can verify what that is, but generally I believe that's why there's that edge of that there.
Right.
And the one thing, and as you mentioned with the elevation, and our lead modeler mentioned that to us as well, that just the way the elevation climbs out from the airport it ends up, depending on where you are, kind of also affecting it. So it's not like it's a flat line out, and if you were to build a higher wall or something, it could have more of an effect. The actual climb up out of the elevation does end up carrying the sound up there a little bit differently than if it was a flat. So we are seeing effects of elevation in the results because obviously there's elevation climbing out from the airport. So just keep that in mind when you look at the receptor values as well.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, Tim, that led up to my next question, and apologies for the drums in the background. But I wonder with this model, because we're looking at a bird's eye view, do you have the side view with the elevations? Is that a useful thing to look at, and is it possible with this model?
Sounds good to me, Linda.
Sounds good to me.
The drums are my question.
I don't know. We could look into that, Tim. I think we could. We'll bring that to the modeler and see what could be done in sound plan. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see, because it's, so I know they have obviously the elevation points and they have the lines in the buildings. We'd have to check to see if they have it actually rendered in the 3D way, as opposed to just being the data points of the elevation.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
Well, and then only if it would be a useful thing to look at.
Right.
Well, maybe just even a couple side views that give you a gist of things are coming. So yeah, we'll take that back, Linda. That's a good one.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Linda. Any other people on our panelist list have any comments? Bert, any comments? Anything you'd like us to make sure that we consider when we dive deep into the report?
Well, I first need to do a deep dive into the report myself. I was sending an email to Angela saying, I didn't see a copy of this anywhere for a link or anything else in my box. It's possible it went somewhere else, but I hadn't seen it. And I would like to delve deep into the report before I comment.
Excellent. Completely understandable. All right. With that, Angela, do we have, moving over to the attendees list, anyone there want to comment on this, knowing that we are going to come back and comment, but help your members know what we should be looking for when we read the report? I see Joe Baylock.
Thank you, Chair Schneider. As a reminder, for those calling by phone, you may press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. And as of right now, I do see one hand raised. So give me 1 second, Mr. Baylock.
And Mr. Baylock, when you do comment, could you please tell me what city? That way, I'm a geographer. I really do help. It helps me to know where people live.
Mr. Baylock, please accept the request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
I've done that. Can you hear me?
Very quietly.
We can.
Great, excellent. And I'm in Burlingame. I'm only about 2 blocks out of San Mateo Park, so the very southern tip of Burlingame.
You're very faint. Is there a way you can raise your volume?
Angela, do you want to stop the clock?
Is that any better?
About the same.
Mr. Baylock, just try to speak as loudly as you can, please.
Okay, Ann, I don't get that request very often.
We're a friendly group at this level.
Very easily. So I'm at the very southern end of Burlingame, about 2 blocks out of San Mateo Park.
Okay, very good.
Excellent. Bearing in mind that I haven't seen any of the report yet, and I do hope that it'll become available for public review fairly soon. The only question I have at the moment is on the readings that are taken, are there also the add-ons for evening and nighttime, the 3 dB and 10 dB quote unquote penalties being shown into any of the calculations similar to what goes into the CNEL calculation?
Justin?
I'd be happy to answer that. So yes, it's not like Tim was saying earlier, the duration isn't necessarily taken into account. This isn't a CNEL metric. So it is the L max, which is the maximum noise level, instantaneous noise level, basically, of a single departure, or in one scenario, there's 2 departures going on at the same time. So it's as if the noise event occurred anytime during the day. It doesn't matter when. It's just it's being modeled at that particular point from a takeoff, and what is the loudest L max value coming from that. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, I think so. So to get the sense of how it would compare to other actual readings, you'd want to add the penalties in manually afterwards, right?
Yeah, if you wanted to do like a CNEL calc to add in penalties, you would then take into account the duration of the event and how many events occur, say, in a 24-hour period, to capture that 24-hour average with the penalties.
Right.
So you could kind of equate that out if you wanted to.
Okay, great. And I'll follow up with Ricardo as our rep on when the document becomes available for public review. So thank you.
And just for clarification, the report is available on our website today. It's posted under meetings, January 27th, ground-based noise. And when you open that URL, is the agenda for the meeting, and it says printable version there, and you open that up and there's the full study. But we'll try to make it more obvious.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. It was posted last Friday. And I do see another hand raised by Miss Lynn Israelit.
Actually, Angela, before we go to Miss Lynn Israelite, question for Justin. Going back to what the gentleman from Burlingame just said, so we're using that one episode, it's not the duration. We're also looking at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees humidity, which when I looked at that, I go, okay, that's probably pretty good for a nighttime comparison. Is that the average that the industry tends to use all the time, as 70% humidity? Because it's still really hard, 5 years into Airport Roundtable, to explain to the public why we experience this noise differently on a hot, windy day or a hot, no windy day. And it's still hard to wrap your hands around that experience. I don't know if there's any place for that in the study, but maybe
Tim,
that fits in the glossary.
Tim, do you want to add anything on how we determine that, or? Yeah.
Well, we used SoundPlan actually uses default average settings, which is based off of, I believe it's 30-year average. And that's just one of the ways that these models, and AEDT does it as well. They prefer you use the 30-year average, because then it kind of just balances it out, so you don't have a hot day or a cold day. That's not to say that on hot days you might hear stuff differently than on cold days, but generally all of the noise models prefer to have a level of, I don't want to say it's standardization, but they kind of just want to normalize it so that weather doesn't have an effect on the results on what your baseline results will be.
Okay.
How you're comparing.
You can run the model and change it. So you could run a model and have 100% humidity compared to 0% humidity. So there are ways to do that, but generally the models and the standards for running the models is to use the defaults that are based off of the 30-year average. So
And
it gives you a better representation of what an average day would be, essentially.
I understand that. I think part of the problem with models, anything in the environmental field right now, is with climate change accelerating. The 30-year average is using conditions that will no longer exist. So it's something to think about how that, and maybe it's only a degree of humidity or a degree of temperature and it doesn't mean anything statistically, but think about that now that we have to look at the new reality, just like we're looking that wind conditions are changing. So, all right.
Right, and that's something in scopes of work we end up changing at some airports. Some airports will ask us to just use the past 5 years of data. And especially if it's not an FAA funded project, there's a little bit more leeway with that. So if the airport asks us to do that, we can use, or if you want to extrapolate out and have like a forecast where you think it might be in 10 years what the average humidity was, those can be inputted into the model as well. So we can adjust based off of how you want us to see it. So.
Thank you. And Ms. Israelite, sorry that I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
Hi, am I unmuted now?
You are.
Okay,
you are.
great. All right, thank you so much. I have missed several meetings in the recent past, but thank you for continuing to do all the work you've been doing. First of all, thank you for this model. This is something that's going to be a very helpful tool, I think, for us to figure out what is actually going on. I thought at one point you had talked about also modeling, like if two planes take off at the same time, or what types of planes would be taking off, as well as where the planes actually lift off from the runway, and looking at how that affects the sound that we hear. So I don't know if that's something that's in the future. As I said, I've missed a few meetings and I apologize if you already have discussed this. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is that I'd really hoped that there had been more monitors in the Burlingame Easton Addition area on your map. It looks like it's one of the more highly impacted areas for noise, and there's really only one monitor compared to lots and lots of monitors in Millbrae. So that would have been nice. And then, so that's, I guess those are the most important things. That is Burlingame being studied and monitored enough that we can really be well represented, and also the other factors that we're going to be studied using this model to see what else we could maybe alter to help with the problem.
Before I let staff jump in, amongst the 6 scenarios is a scenario with 2 planes taking off from runway 1 on that. I have questions even on that scenario. And they did use a range of different airplanes based on the most frequently used. It's an interesting section that I'm a little confused about on where exactly the measurement point is. But once you get a chance to read into that, you'll see that. But I'm sure it's going to bring you more questions. It did for me. If you wanted to answer her question about, did we get enough monitors in Burlingame and Hillsborough and San Bruno for that matter, I was kind of amazed at how many were in Millbrae. I'm pleased, I do represent Millbrae, but I want to be fair to all of the jurisdictions.
Yeah. And do you know how many were in Burlingame exactly?
I believe there's 2 in Burlingame, and I think 3 in Hillsborough. I'm just looking at the map on this screen. The one question I had is, were you discussing putting in Burlingame closer to the 101? Because I think a lot of that ends up being commercial, and so we were trying to focus and put a lot of the monitors in kind of residential areas. So I think potentially that could have been one of the reasons it wasn't put too farther closer to the airport in Burlingame. But I know there is the one that's RMC 11, which is kind of right in the center, I believe.
Yeah, and I would say too, I don't want to. I'd like to emphasize that while these are just receptor points of values, the figures and the information being calculated are throughout the community. So hopefully the figure shows those values. where you could zoom in and see the contour value. And those receptors were trying to get a representation of different areas. And like Tim said, we tried to focus in on the residential areas for that purpose. So, and answered your other question, and we'll be happy to answer any other questions you have after kind of looking at the different scenarios, including the two aircraft types departing at the same time.
Yeah,
Justin,
we
were
do.
we also looking at receptors that might show us how noise moves through canyons and the tops of hillsides? Was that one of the criteria?
Yeah, I mean, in our selection, that was the case. You know, we incorporated ones where you guys gave us an address or particularly, you know, a park. We were looking at it on the terms of trying to spread them out to capture residential areas and areas such as that, where we thought that it might be interesting to see terrain effects, which you still see, you know, which I think the biggest thing is the figures. You could clearly see the effects of terrain spreading throughout, not just at a receiver point, but throughout the community.
When Justin and Michelle and I had our call, I have learned that we're getting a lot more one-on-one noise than I thought. I'm looking at Eastern Edition right now, and a lot of the one-on-one impact is in Burlingame's industrial area and less to its residential. But if we had a measurement point there, comparing it to Millbrae, we could back out, we might be able to back out what kind of noise Eastern Edition or other parts of Burlingame are getting from 101 itself. Burlingame along 101 also has no sound walls. The sound walls don't start up until San Mateo. So Burlingame may be just like Millbrae and wanting to look at Samtran and Samtran doing noise mitigation, because it's all increments. If we can reduce the noise from 101, reduce it from the airport, reduce it from the train, all of our people will sleep better. And Eastern Edition, I had to Google map it, is just southeast or southwest of Ray Park. I don't know all your Burlingame neighborhoods. We'd have been close. The monitor, the permanent monitor at Ben Franklin isn't that far away. So when you just had the permanent monitors, I don't have the number in front of me, but we'll look at it.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. And we do have another hand raised by Gail Barker, and I do see Ms. Lynn raised. Oh, no, she lowered her hand again. She did raise her hand again, actually, and I'll leave that up to your discretion, as she did already have 2 minutes.
It's my understanding that at this level, we try to be a lot more back and forth with people because comments raise new questions. So if the rest of the members are okay, I would say, let's make this an open conversation. And we've got 20 minutes left or 19 minutes left on our call.
So Ms. Barker, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Hi, my name's Gail Barker. Can you hear me?
You're coming in great.
We can.
Excellent. I just want to introduce myself. I'm a noise engineer at Boeing and
the timer.
Have been watching. I called in because I want to educate myself in what's happening in the world in airport noise. I met Justin Cook on a proposal earlier, so I think that it's excellent work. I can't say that I'm doing any work in the direction of what you're working on, but I do want to introduce myself because I want to call in more often in the future.
I can't speak for everyone, but I am very happy that you are here. Are you up in Washington or another location?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle.
You're in Seattle. The question that I bring up at Roundtable, and I will bring up with you since we have the opportunity, is we have been told that low frequency noise is very difficult to mitigate. More work has been done in mitigating high frequency noise in terms of the wing design and things like that. What I would love to challenge Boeing and Airbus and the jet engine manufacturers is to really concentrate on reducing low frequency noise during departure and the vibration from it. And I envision in our area, as in your area, where we have so many tech people, and we make a challenge and we give a reward at the end. Ultimately, to me, that's the real solution to the problem. So I'm very happy to have you here, even though I think we understand it's hard to mitigate. I would love to see you all mitigating it at the point source.
I appreciate that feedback, and the more that we have inputs, the better we direct our energy and resources. So appreciate that.
I have cousins who live in Mount Baker in Seattle, and I was there for Thanksgiving, and I was in the upstairs bedroom and at night, and it was raining, maybe snowing, and I experienced low frequency noise there and the vibration there. And I think they're a good 7 miles from SeaTac. So it's interesting just how far afield low frequency noise moves.
Right. It is.
So again, I think we would love to have you, and I will try very hard not to beat you up very hard.
Oh, I'm pretty good at dodging things. So I mean, not on behalf of Boeing, but on my own.
Welcome. Do any of the members have any questions, since we have an actual engineer with us?
Good to hear your voice, Gail.
Thank you. It's nice to see your picture.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay. If not, then Lynn, why don't you join us again? And thank you, Ms. Barker.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I just wanted, there was no way for me to clarify when you were asking questions after my question was asked. And I'm sorry that Easton Edition, I wasn't very clear, but if Justin could go back to the map that he had up that showed where the monitors were located, it was in blues and greens and purples, I believe.
Yeah, on a 28. Could we pull up a runway 1? That might be better.
You guys, this is Ricardo. I'm gonna have to drop out. I have a work thing that I have to go tend to. So thank you very much. A good meeting. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Keep safe.
Thank you.
Okay, Angela, is it okay if I screen share and take you over? Okay.
Okay. There was another map that there was another map that was after this one that showed some sound, or perhaps you had zoomed in and it had purples and greens.
Oh, that purple. Okay, that's the 2A.
That was the runway 28.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess yes. So my point was, you can see where there's a monitor RMT 11 in Burlingame, but that's the only monitor that's really in Burlingame. It is, I'm not talking about the area along 101. We don't hear noise on 101. I clearly, we hear intermittent airplane noise. It's very different. And Easton Edition is where all of those densely packed houses are in the green before it goes to that teal color. So I'm disappointed that there's just one monitor and one spot for that entire densely residential area, especially as, of our 230 members of our ground-based noise resident group, most of them are in Burlingame. So I just wanted to clarify, it's not noise from 101, it's not noise from El Camino, it is definitely airport ground-based noise, and yet and you can see that we're definitely impacted quite a bit in that area, and yet we only have one monitor, and that doesn't seem right.
Justin, these are virtual monitors, correct?
They are. I mean, that RMT 11 actually also happens to be a permanent noise monitor. And I apologize. I understand your concern in that area. It's dense and it has only one location. We tried to be as, we tried to put as many receivers as we could. And we definitely went over, what our scope said in hopes we would just try to get as much information to you as possible. You will see that though the values are being calculated. So it's not as though the only values in this study are represented by RMT 11, but you could see on these contour figures how noise is propagating. And you'll see that although it is, in the louder range color, it's pretty consistent throughout those densely populated neighborhoods. And so from my perspective, it's sort of representative of that area and provides a good indication. But it's not to say that we, in the future can't do more locations in that area. And it was being, calculated within the model. So it is there. It's just that was the one point that we had in that location. So that it
Lynn?
noted.
Lynn, if it helps, one of the things I am hoping that will come from this study, perhaps with more data, is to draw contours based on low frequency noise. If you look at the existing contours, they're not taking into account any of the noise that we experience, Burlingame, Hillsborough, Millbrae, and portions of San Bruno. So I am hopeful that with those noise contours and the current diagrams, you can't see the color coding below it. So I can't see what green means, but and I didn't have a lot of time with the study. When you read the study, look at the colors and what contour you might be in if we can draw contours based on low frequency noise.
That looks to be around the 65-70 range.
The green is in the 65-70. Okay, that's important.
This type of study, and I will say, Anne, that these are technically contours. In that it's a density map, but you could see the lines that are in between the values. Now those lines could actually be thicker to where it would be more representative, like you're saying, as an actual contour line. It just becomes it wouldn't be your typical contour line of a smooth contour line that you would see. Obviously you could see how jagged it would be going through and calculating all of that detail. So it would look like it would be a funky contour. Let's just say that, but those can be done in that you could draw an actual line between the values.
I for one would like to see it just from a starting point. I don't know if the other members, what they feel. And Michelle, I am having a complication. My screen has just gone blank. My fairly new laptop does this intermittently. I can't see if there are other hands raised. I can't see anyone's faces. I know we're getting close to the end of time. If there's anyone else from the public that want to have comments in so that we can, I would encourage all of us as we read the study, write out your questions, put them in an electronic format. Michelle, how should we handle questions coming in? Who should they go to?
First of all, there's nobody's hand is raised, and we do have an email that we could ask people to communicate to, but I'm going to ask Angela for that because that had to recently change, and people could communicate directly with that email.
Thank you.
So for now, it would be directly to my email, and it's a bit long, but it is amontescardenas@smcgov.org.
And that's AMONTES.
And it is on the website. Sorry, I'm sorry, Michelle. It is up on the website under Contact Us, if that makes it easier. Thank you.
And it sounds to me, and my guess is because that Al and Ricardo would like to have some time with Justin to bounce ideas and get clarification. I guess what I'm looking at is how much time, and Linda for that matter, and maybe Kathleen representing Congresswoman Spear, what time frame should we look at? Typically, we have been trying to get back to ground-based noise every other month. So our next time together would be in March. But would it be helpful to have comments into Justin and Timothy a month from now? What is practical? I'm open to comments. Otherwise, I'll pick a date on a calendar.
Now, I'll let Michelle speak to the logistics part, but I think giving a few weeks for people to digest and send comments in writing is probably a good way to manage it.
Okay. So a few weeks, or give it a good month. Sometimes too much time, it drops to the bottom of your to-do list. We do have roundtable next week.
We
Is it
do.
next week? Time
That's
is moving so fast. So I know that staff has plenty of work to get ready for the full roundtable. Al, what do you think? 2 weeks, or should we give it a month?
I was going to say 3 weeks, but 2 weeks
Okay.
is fine.
Three weeks is great.
Yeah.
I hear 3 weeks.
So due by February 19th, Friday, February 19th.
Okay. And to the public too. And if we can put that on the website, that we're trying to get comments so that staff has time to review them for our next ground-based meeting in March.
Okay, sounds good.
Justin, all our time of dealing with the FAA that they want things in the form of a question. What is the most useful for you? Is it most useful to get a page number, paragraph number with a question, so you don't have to look all over the report to find it? What would you like? What'll
That
speed
would
up
be
the
nice.
process?
Oh, we would love that. We don't usually get that. We just get a bunch of comments and we're used to trying to figure it out. So yeah, if it referenced a page number at minimum, that would be great. Paragraph, even better. That would help us to just go through those, and we'd be happy to like collect all those and formulate it into one, one response.
And the figures and tables are labeled too. So if it's a comment on a figure from one of the graphics, just say, on figure 8 or figure 10, whichever.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the
That'd
way,
be helpful.
By the way, is it possible to get a hard copy sent? It's 175 pages, and I don't know if I have that much ink for.
Michelle, do we have the budget for it?
If not, I'll have the city do it. But
this is so Angela can have to respond to this. She's
Yes,
yeah.
Mr. Ward, I can accommodate that for you. For
Could
sure.
you? I'd greatly appreciate it here.
No
So
problem.
then the next question is keeping it within the ground-based noise committee, or expanding it out to the full roundtable, or give it a little bit more time to possibly tweak the report. Okay, I'm saying Michelle is saying, wait, keep it within us. Very good. Michelle, if you could send out instructions to Ricardo, all of us saying, please cite page number and paragraph and the specific comment or question on that. I have one comment from my very old days of making maps and charts. When I was scrolling between the various charts and you go to a new page and you're scrolling quickly, so it's jumping around the PDF, I had to do a lot of back and forth. To me, the top of every new page should say what that, if you've had to break a set of data, put the name of the data on the top of each page, so I don't have to scroll back to the page to say, oh, I'm looking at R1 left, or I'm looking at 28 left. I just found myself scrolling up and down and up and down. Just a comment.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha.
With that, we are 4 minutes in advance. Any further comments from the panelists, from the members?
Just
All
thanks
right.
to Justin and Tim. Well done.
Again, thank you.
Thank you.
It's really
Thank you.
interesting. We finished our council meeting last night only to hear that Congresswoman Spear had our medical doctor saying, when you go out, you should be wearing several layers of masks. So I called my city manager after council saying, we're going to get a notice out. Everyone, please keep safe. And you may be considering wearing a few masks when you go out. We're getting there though.
Thanks.
Keep safe, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being here
Thanks,
today.
everyone.
You too.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Michelle and
Have a good
Angela,
day.
thank you. And Justin, thank you for organizing
you.
everything.
Yep.
Take care.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you.